Automobil verbunden.
This is how the production of the Trabant was completed at the Zwickau factory in Germany. Quality control was carried out with a hammer and strong hands. As you can see right now, each Trabant car was actually a unique product. It was actually handmade, like a Rolls-Royce. The advantage of Trabant cars has always been that the owners could easily repair it on their own. Over a production run of more than 30 years, more than 3 million Trabants were produced. It was the most widely used car in East Germany. The quality of the workmanship of a particular car depended on how much care and attention these German factory employees gave it. And now we move to the beginning of the production line of the famous Trabant brand. The production of Trabants started, like today's car factories, in a press shop. It featured detachable Duroplast body panels on a galvanized steel unibody chassis, front-wheel drive, a transverse two-stroke engine, and independent suspension. Employees in this factory wear blue protective suits with the logo of the Trabant manufacturer. The manufacturer of the Trabants was VEB Sachsenring. Now the employees have molded and assembled the galvanized steel unibody chassis of the Trabant. The chassis frame and engine were assembled separately from the body assembly. You can see for yourself that the whole production process was very similar to that in modern car factories. The chassis frame will now be moved by overhead cranes to the next production hall where it will be welded. The Trabant chassis floor was well thought out and worked out. That is why tens of thousands of Trabants are still in service to this day. The machining of the galvanized steel frame has been variable over the years. The Trabant was renowned for having undergone almost no improvements in its decades of production. The material was durable, and the average lifespan of a Trabant was 28 years. Older models have been sought by collectors in the United States due to their low cost and fewer restrictions on the importation of antique cars. The Trabant had a steel frame with the roof, boot lid, bonnet, wings, and doors made of Duroplast. The car body was made of Duroplast. It is a composite thermosetting resin plastic. Duroplast production method places it in a similar family as formica and bakelite. It is reinforced with fibers, typically waste fabrics from the garment industry, making it a fiber-reinforced plastic similar to fiberglass. You are now seeing the processing of Duroplast materials and padding for roofs, doors, and the like. A light yet strong material, Duroplast is made of recycled material, phenol resins, and cotton waste fiber reinforcement. Because it is formed in a press, it is more easily applied to volume car production than fiberglass. Duroplast is difficult to dispose of responsibly, a similar problem encountered with fiberglass. As discarded Trabants began to fill junkyards after 1991, creative solutions were devised for recycling them. This testing facility at the Trabant Factory tried to operate at the highest level of technology possible in communist countries. However, huge amounts of money went into armaments, which could not keep up with the progress in Western Europe. Manufactured by a state monopoly, a Trabant took about 10 years to acquire. The waiting time depended on their proximity to Berlin, the capital. Now the finished Trabant bodies are moved to the paint shop using rails in the factory floor. Here, the selected car paint was applied automatically. The free market price for a second-hand one was more than twice the price of a new one, and the average worker had to wait 10 to 13 years on a waiting list, or if available, pay more than double for a second-hand model. The Trabant's build quality was poor, and it was loud, slow, and poorly designed. The cars are often referred to as Trabi or Trabi. However, this unique vehicle had a variety of nicknames. Known for its dull color scheme and cramped, uncomfortable ride, the Trabant is an object of ridicule for many Germans and is regarded as symbolic of the fall of the Eastern Bloc. In comparative crash tests in the early 1990s, on the other hand, it fared better than some metal-bodied cars. In 1989, a total of over 150,000 Trabants were produced in a single year. You are now watching the assembly of the gearbox and engine in a separate part of the Trabant factory. Each engine was assembled manually by specially trained factory employees. Now the finished and painted car body is lowered onto the finished chassis with the engine. After bolting the body to the chassis, the main assembly line continues. Here, workers add the lights, connect the wiring, attach the steering wheel, gear lever, pedals, seats, and other parts of the Trabant's interior. The wheels are delivered to the main assembly line using this feeder. Trabant 601 was the third generation of the model, built for the longest production time from 1964 to 1990. This is what the all-new Trabant looked like immediately after production. The engine performance will now be tested in the final stage of production. On the test dyno, it took 21 seconds to accelerate from 0 to its top speed of 100 kilometers per hour, which is 62 miles per hour. Following the reunification of Germany in 1990, Sachsenring transitioned from a government-owned company under a centrally planned economy to a private corporation in a free market economy. The driving characteristics of the Trabants were tested on this track next to the production hall. This test is called the Moose test. In hindsight, the Trabant 601 can be considered East Germany's answer to West Germany's people's car, the Volkswagen Beetle. Its purpose was to provide a cheap but still reliable car that was very affordable and also easy to repair and maintain. Still, it was at the time of its release rather modern in many ways, with front-wheel drive combined with transversely mounted motor, a low-maintenance engine, unitary construction, rack and pinion steering, composite bodywork, and independent suspension all around. Now the bodywork is being sealed in preparation for the anti-corrosion bath. You are now watching the entire bodywork being dipped in corrosion protection. This employee inspects the bodywork and prepares it for the next stage of production. Employees are now assembling the doors, bonnet, and completing the final bodywork. Employees are now assembling the doors, bonnet, and completing the final bodywork. Trabant has also won fans among tuning and rally enthusiasts. The Trabant was a great car for the time in which it was built. The problem with the Trabant was the lack of improvements and no further development into better models. The main letdown was the engine, which was a two-stroke based on a pre-war Das kleine Wunder. It was competitive when launched, but from the late 1950s into the 1960s, small economy cars in Western countries that used two-stroke engines were replaced with cleaner and more efficient four-stroke engines, as employed from the start in the Volkswagen Beetle. Now the roof is being attached to the body. As you can see, the roof has more layers. These employees worked as fast as they could, even so they were unable to meet the demand for these cars. Also, in the production of Trabants, quality control was carried out during the production process. The new line at the Zwickau factory was able to paint the bodywork using these hand-spraying robots at the end of the 1980s. Because this 1950s design remained largely unchanged until the introduction of the last model, the Trabant 1.1 in 1990. The Trabant became symbolic of the former East Germany's stagnant economy and the collapse of the Eastern Bloc in general. Called a spark plug with a roof, 3,096,999 Trabants were produced. Its curb weight was about 600 kilograms, which is 1,323 pounds. When it ceased production in 1989, the Trabant delivered 26 PS, which is 19 kilowatts. The Trabant has a two-cylinder motor, and its body is made of resin mixed with cotton from Moscow. And although it was far from being a stable car, it became one of the most coveted cars capable of transporting 4 adults and their luggage. Trabant car bodies moved across the factory on sliding rails, much like in today's factories. VEB Sachsenring was founded in 1957 and employed approximately 3,000 people. Two-stroke engines of this sort with crankcase scavenging and lubricating oil provided during fuel intake burn their lubricating oil by design and produce smoky tailpipe emissions. However, two-stroke engines also powered cars such as the West German Auto Union 1000 that ended production in 1965, and the Swedish Saab 96 that changed to four-stroke in 1967. It was planned to replace the two-stroke motor with a Wankel engine. However, East Germany failed to develop such a motor with satisfying parameters. Later, the lack of development funds in East Germany forced the continued use of a two-stroke engine in the Trabant, thus causing this vehicle to become outdated towards the end of the 1960s and obsolete by the 1980s. In order to allow the automaker's employees to assemble the lower parts of the car well, the car rotated on its axis. You are now watching the finished body being mounted on the chassis with the engine. Especially the chassis of the Trabant was hand-welded. Today, robots do this work. The employees in the Zwickau factory were mostly East Germans. However, other nationalities also worked there. Unlike the pre-war twin-cylinder engines, the Trabant engines were air-cooled, initially providing 17 horsepower, and later on the Type 601, after modernization, 26 horsepower. A large number of women worked in the quality control of this factory. This is an aerial view of the Zwickau factories where the famous Trabant cars were made. The Trabant P50 was produced from 1957 to 1962. The Trabant 600 was produced from 1962 to 1965. The Trabant 1.1 was produced from 1990 to 1991. The most famous was the Trabant 601, whose production you are watching right now, which was produced from 1964 to 1990. Quite revolutionary was the all-in-front concept. The transversely mounted engine was in front of the front axle, which it drove. At the time, the so-called classic concept with front engine and rear-wheel drive was common, and the all-rear concept was beginning to proliferate, which was taken up in the 1960s by, for example, Skoda. Trabant sold for 7,400 Deutschmarks at launch. Less than 22,000 of the P50, also known as the Trabant 500, were built over 5 years of production. Trabants may have been small, but they were quite demanding to produce. Due to the difficulty of molding the Duroplast, the cars were made by hand, and it was literally the case that every car was an original. The most popular model, the Trabant 601, had the same engine and wheelbase as the previous 600. The Trabant 601's appearance has changed slightly, and the length and width of the body has increased. There are still some 33,000 Trabants roaming the streets of Germany today. The finished bodywork was loaded using forklift truck and transported to the main assembly line. Women also worked in the Zwickau factory, but only about 15% of all employees. Working conditions in the Zwickau factories were very bad and unhealthy. Over the 27 years of 601 Trabants, many subversions have been created. The basic type was a 2-door limousine. The alternative was a 3-door coupe. In richer equipment versions, the cars were enriched with fog lights or a speedometer. In addition, from 1966, an off-road version with outdoors and with a canvas roof was produced for the East German Armed Forces. After the start of serial production of the 601, the new Trabant 602 was developed in Zwickau. The car was to be larger, the base was not to be a limousine, but a hatchback, and more powerful engines were to be used. The concept of the hatchback was further developed by the chief designer in the 603 prototype, which is sometimes considered the model for the aforementioned Volkswagen Golf. However, the development of both the 602 and 603 was eventually halted due to instructions from the management. Because the Trabant had no fuel pump, its fuel tank was above the motor, so fuel could reach the carburetor by gravity. This increased the risk of fire in front-end accidents. Earlier models had no fuel gauge, and a dipstick was inserted into the tank to determine how much fuel remained. The 1980s model had no tachometer, no indicator for either the headlights or turn signals, no fuel gauge, no rear seat belts, no external fuel door. In contrast, the West German Volkswagen Beetle received a number of updates over a similar period. Its inefficient, labor-intensive production line had only survived thanks to government subsidies. Trabant P601 also had an overrunning clutch when running in fourth gear. With change to 12 volts in 1984, options as hazard flashers and rear window heater became available. Further, the Trabant never was a symbol of communist bureaucrats. Finally, the Trabant also is a symbol for breaking through the wall in 1989. Many Trabant owners' clubs exist throughout Europe, and 601s have their fans all over the world. Also, many Trabant 601s are still used as rally racing cars. After 3 years in bankruptcy, Sachsenring AG was purchased in February 2006 by HQM of Leipzig. The engine produced a very smoky exhaust and was a significant source of air pollution. 9 times the hydrocarbons and 5 times the carbon monoxide emissions of the average 2007 European car. Its fuel consumption was 7 liters per 100 kilometers. Since the engine was 2-stroke, oil had to be added to the 24-liter fuel tank at a 50-to-1 ratio of fuel to oil at each fill-up. Contemporary gas stations in countries where 2-stroke engines were common sold a pre-mixed gas-oil mixture at the pump. Because the Trabant had no fuel pump, its fuel tank was above the motor, so fuel could reach the carburetor by gravity. This increased the risk of fire in front-end accidents. Earlier models had no fuel gauge, and a dipstick was inserted into the tank to determine how much fuel remained. The Trabant was the result of a planning process which had been intended to design a 3-wheeled motorcycle. In German, Trabant is an astronomical term for a moon of a celestial body. Each proposal for a new model was rejected by the East German government due to shortages of the raw materials required in larger quantities for the more advanced designs. VEB Sachsenring was one of the few manufacturers of vehicles in East Germany, its best-known product being the Trabant, produced between 1957 and 1991. As a result, the Trabant remained largely unchanged for more than a quarter century. Also unchanged was its production method, which was extremely labor-intensive. The first .1 had front disc brakes, and its wheel assembly was borrowed from Volkswagen. It was produced from 1989 to 1991 in parallel with the 2-stroke P601. Except for the engine and transmission, many parts from older P50s, P60s, and 601s were compatible with the 1.1. Many Trabant vehicles were abandoned in Germany after 1989. A Volkswagen Golf can be seen parked in the background. Private brands like Volkswagen spilled over into East Germany after its state-owned auto industry collapsed. Employees usually worked in plain clothes and without protective helmets and goggles. The body of the Trabant is now placed on the finished chassis using a crane. This process is to this day called and referred to as the marriage. You are now watching the finishing and polishing of the Trabant 601 bodywork. Now you can see how the assembly of all wheels on the Trabant 601. The wheels of the Trabant were fixed on 4 classic screws, nothing complicated. When a successor, the Trabant 1.1, was eventually developed, it received minimal external differences. The only exterior changes were a new radiator grille, bumpers, taillights, a more square bonnet. The interior was subject to many changes. The Zwickau factory in Mosel, where the Trabant was manufactured, was sold to Volkswagen AG. The rest of the company became VEB Sachsenring. Volkswagen redeveloped the Zwickau factory into a center for engine production. It also produces some Volkswagen Golfs and Passats. The employee will check the waterproofing of the doors, front window, and other body gaps. Trabant interior waterproofing testing now underway. Unfortunately, this check was not carried out on all cars, but only on randomly selected Trabants. The Trabant excelled in its ability to pollute the environment. The exhaust fumes were terrible. After completion, the new cars were loaded onto trains or trucks and shipped throughout the communist countries. Employees at the Zwickau factory load hundreds of Trabant cars onto trains every day. Although Trabant production was relatively large, it was unable to meet the demand of the population. Each car was equipped with a checklist where employees recorded the assembly performed. Thousands of East Germans drove their Trabants over the border when the wall fell, which made it a kind of automotive liberator. New models were considered, with the P602, P603, and P610 being planned in Zwickau. Among other improvements researched were larger motors and also Wankel engines. All improvements, however, were blocked by the East German government, which considered them unnecessary and feared the extra costs. However, the Trabant was a robust, functional, and repair-friendly car, so many people developed a strong relationship to their Trabant. This is the Wartburg factory in East Germany. VEB Automobile Work Eisenach produced reliable Wartburg cars here. You will see the production process from the beginning. At the end will be this finished Wartburg car. The whole production started in these furnaces where the steel parts of the engine were cast. This factory was located near the German town of Eisenach since 1898. Production ended on April 1991, and the factory was acquired by Opel. There are still some cars in a roadworthy condition, and Wartburg owners' clubs exist throughout Europe. The first model Wartburg 311 was produced between 1956 and 1965. Some Wartburgs are still used as rally cars. Wartburg 313 Roadster was produced from 1957 to 1960. Model 312 from 1965 to 1967. 1960 years. Now the Wartburg body connection is being completed. Tailgate and rear fenders were made of glass fiber-reinforced plastic. The Wartburg 353, known in some export markets as the Wartburg Knight, is a medium-sized family car produced by the East German car manufacturer AWE for their Wartburg brand. It was the successor of the Wartburg 311 and was itself succeeded by the Wartburg 1.3. The Wartburg 353 was produced from 1966 to 1988, becoming the Wartburg with the longest production run. During its lifetime, it saw several changes and improvements, the most recognizable of which came in 1985 with a front facelift, a slightly different layout around the engine block, and a new carburetor.
Versehen.
Now you can see that the painting was done as a combination of manual and machine spraying. In the pressing and welding department, these huge pressing machines were the painted body of the Wartburg was properly polished with large brushes as in a car wash. Powerful cranes built into the factory ceiling were also used to move heavy loads inside the factories. Its origins were ultimately derived from a 1938 DKW design and powered by a two-stroke engine with only 7 major moving parts, 3 pistons, 3 connecting rods, and a crankshaft. This led to a common aphorism among Wartburg owners, which is that one drives a car but only has to maintain a motorcycle. Domestically, it was used for all government transportation, sometimes as a Volkspolizei police car. However, due to the nature of the planned economy, deliveries to private owners could take 10 to 15 years. Like other Eastern Europe cars, it was known for its low price in export markets. Because of its forward center of gravity and front-wheel drive, the car had typical front-wheel drive road handling, usually displaying significant understeer, especially in wet conditions. Wartburgs were exported to most European markets and South Africa. Now you are looking at the finished chassis frame of the Wartburg 353. These Wartburgs Knight have 993 cubic centimeter two-stroke i3 engines. The 4-speed manual transmission has often been criticized. You are now looking at the finished chassis with wheels, shock absorbers, and engine. The chassis is now connected to the red body by means of a lowering crane. Today, Wartburg 353s are customized for reaching speeds well about 200 kilometers per hour, which is 125 miles per hour, whereas the original design called for a critical speed of 150 kilometers per hour, which is 96 miles per hour. The Wartburg 353 was powered by a 1-liter displacement, 3-cylinder unit that took almost 2 decades to refine. While developing about 50 to 55 PS, its 2-stroke engine design provided more than 100 nanometers of torque, which was a typical figure for many larger 4-stroke engines at that time. The transmission was equipped with a freewheel, obviating the need to use the clutch between gears. Designed as a fuel efficiency measure and as a means of protecting the engine from oil starvation due to the nature of 2 strokes, the device disabled engine braking. The car could coast whenever the throttle was released. Drivers could turn the freewheel off through a switch under the steering column to benefit from engine braking, which was useful since the front brakes were prone to overheating and fading. However, most drivers never disabled the freewheel because it made shifting gears significantly easier and smoother, though not quicker. Earlier models had the gear stick on the steering column, although later versions had it on the floor. The Wartburg 353 was commonly nicknamed Trustworthy Hans or Farty Hans by owners due to its durability and copious exhaust emissions, especially when cold and or overoiled. Disadvantages in terms of passengers' comfort are well known too. Lack of any sound dampening led to significant engine feedback through the body panels, whose boomy reverberation led to another nickname, the barrel. Now the new cars have been tested on the dyno. This is how the engine performance was tested. As you can see, most manufacturing processes are not much different from those of today. Now you are looking at the finished chassis frame of the Wartburg 353. Now you are looking at the installation of powerful engines in Wartburg cars. Employees of this VEB could go to work in any clothes they were comfortable with. The 353 was a reasonable success throughout the Eastern Bloc, with front-wheel drive. Its negatives were due to its outmoded 2-stroke engine. The last modernization of Wartburg took place in 1988, when the car got the new designation 1.3 and a 4-stroke VW-designed engine with a 1.3-liter displacement. There were also 3 body styles of the Wartburg 353: limousine, sedan, tourist, combi, and trans pickup. In the deluxe version, electronic ignition, 5-speed gearbox, front and rear fog lights, an alarm system, and central lock door were available. Exports to West Germany began in 1958, and by the early 1960s, the car was exported to other countries, including the United Kingdom and United States. In 1988, the new model Wartburg 1.3 therefore replaced the old model 353s, featuring the reliable, though bulkier, 4-stroke engine from the Volkswagen Golf. Very few Wartburgs were equipped with a stereo system because it was impossible to enjoy the usual level of listening over the engine noise. The suspension provided sensibly different handling and comfort when the car was empty and carrying passengers and luggage. Owners' accounts are that control and smoothness improved, the more the car was loaded. It was also available as a pickup version named Wartburg 353 Trans, but was unsuccessful, mainly due to limited payload, only 450 kilograms, and low transport volume. It was mainly used for small deliveries. This car was only sold for export, as it would have been useful mostly to the illegal private business endeavors in East Germany. Wartburg owners' clubs exist throughout Europe, and some Wartburgs are still used as rally racing cars. At the end of production, the cars were parked in this giant parking lot next to the Eisenach plant. They were then loaded and shipped to communist countries or East Germany.